In this video, we'll be setting up a C# Winforms application. I already have Visual Studio open, and to get started, what we will do is go ahead, create a new project. And from the templates, we're looking for Winforms. So I can just search quickly and look for Winforms. And then I want a Winforms or Windows Forms app.NET framework. So that's the one we're working with today. So I select that template, click next. Then I give my project a name, and this one is going to be my first Winforms. Or, I'm not going to do it that simply. What I'm going to do is simulate a real world application. So let's say we wanted to build a forms to support a car rental business. So I'm going to say car rental app. So that is our project name, and then that will be our solution name also. Let me just correct my spelling here. Car rental app. And we can leave it at the .NET framework, so you can see that you have a few versions of .NET framework. If you have installed Visual Studio out of the box, you probably have up to 4.72, or maybe you have 4.8. Any of those work, but I'll leave mine at 4.7.2, and you can put yours to that version also, so that we're on the same page. And then I can go ahead and click create. When this project is created, then you'll see something looking like this, and I call this the canvas. It is the form upon which we will be putting visual elements. But before we get into all of that, let's take some time to appreciate the interface and look at the more important parts. So if we look in our Solution Explorer, and mine is to the left, yours might be to the right by default, but I have my Visual Studio set up that mine is to the left. And if you look in there, you'll see your solution, you'll see your project, but then your project files really comprise the form1.cs and program.cs. Now, form1.cs represents this visual representation that you're seeing here. So this is actually the form one. So if I close this, by any accident, you might have closed the tab. If you double click form1.cs, that is what is going to get launched. So this is your form. Each form that you're going to add is going to look like this until you start putting things on that form. Next important file is program.cs. So I can just click it so we can see inside. And then you see that it looks just like a console program. The console programs come with a static class program by default, the namespace, which is the folder that it's in, and then the static void main, except this one doesn't take any arguments. But if you're not familiar with console programming, then that's no problem. The most important thing to note is that you don't want to be editing this file. All right. So program.cs, later on, when you know what you're doing, you can edit it. And usually you would be editing this file, this line and beyond. But the things that are here, these functions are initializers. And I'm not going to spend time telling you exactly what they're initializing. Just note, please don't comment or delete them. And then this one is what actually says what should be launched when the program launches. So we have form1.cs. It is saying launch a new instance of form1. And when it does that, it will launch our form that we are designing. All right. So we're going to perform a quick activity where we're just going to start this application. We haven't made any changes. We just have it here, and we're just going to click start. And we will see this window launch. So you see this window will launch, and if I hold it up side by side to the canvas, you see that, well, the canvas is empty. My new window is empty. All right. So that is what Winforms looks like, at least out of the box. Now, I just want to point out a mistake that I've seen people make over the years, and then they, get all, they spend time debugging something or trying to solve a problem that they didn't really have. So it's a common mistake to minimize this window inadvertently, and then you're trying to do an operation, you're trying to change code, you're trying to operate some way, somehow, and then you think Visual Studio is not working because it's still in debug mode. So when you click start, it goes into debug mode. You're seeing all these diagnostics. And okay, maybe you're new to Visual Studio, those didn't stand out to you, but then you're trying to, change the code and it's not changing, and you think that Visual Studio is in an error state. What happens is that as long as you're in debug mode, you can't make code changes. So if your Visual Studio looks like this, even though the window is not up on the screen, then you're still in debug mode. So you need to make sure you press stop, or when you close the window, so I minimized it just now, but if I close it, as in I click the X, then it exits debug mode. So a common mistake is that people forget, they launch it, they test it, and then they forget to close it, and then they go back to Visual Studio and try to make whatever adjustments they need to make, and they can't, and they think that it's an error, but they're really still in debug mode. So I'm just pointing that out in case, when you're going along, so that you can be aware of that common mistake. Now, the next most important part of this Winforms development set of features would be the toolbox. So I have my toolbox pane kind of unpinned or docked to the side here. If you don't see a toolbox pane, then you can always go to View, and then you just look for toolbox. All right, there's toolbox, or you can memorize that keyboard shortcut if you want. But the fact is it's there. If you don't see it readily, just go to View and click toolbox and launch it. If you close it by accident, you go to View, click toolbox and launch it. All right, so at any point, if I have a pane that you don't have, you simply need to go to View, find that pane, and open it. So let's start looking at Toolbox. So in Toolbox, you'll see that there are some categories of controls. And for our activity today, I want us to focus on the common controls. So if you just, expand common controls and take a while and look, you can pause this video and just take a while and look through the different controls. You can pause it right here and do that, but I'm going to continue. And the first thing that I would want to do when somebody launches my application is let them know what application they have launched. I mean, I'm sure they went and double click the application to launch it, but then you still want a visual representation, right? So I would bring over a label. All right. So Winforms development, at least to build out the interface, is drag and drop. So I can drag over the label, place it somewhere, and for some reason I get this error. You might not. If you do, then you just click OK, but it will still allow you to proceed. I'm not entirely sure why I get that error, but I'll be getting it. I may need to check my installation of Visual Studio. But pushing on, we look at the label here, and then we want to, we see the label. It's not ideal. It says label 1. The text is tiny and so on. And then your first instinct might be, okay, I need to edit this text, make it bigger or change the text that's in it. And then your second instinct might have you double click. And then you double clicked, and then you ended up in this C# code file. So this is what you call the code behind. So now I'm going to explain two things to you. And this is just to help you be careful when you're doing these activities. So I'm going to go back to the design. And then what I'm going to show you is that when you double click a control, a visual element, what is happening is that it is going to generate a method stub, and it is going to generate, in this case, a click event. So a click event means that when I click this label, this code is going to fire. Now, I don't need any click event on my label, really and truly. I don't need anything to happen when this label is clicked. But I'm just pointing that out because when you double click these visual elements, all you're doing is generating method stubs. So, and once again, the reason for you having double clicked it would be to change its properties. So we want to change the properties. We want to change the text that's in there, and we want to change, the whatever it is about it we want to change. So to do that, we have to right click it and go to properties. Because once again, when we double click, it will just generate a method. It will generate some event, and that's not necessarily what we want. All right. So when you right click the element, in this case, the label, and then I go to properties, then it will launch another pane. That my pane was there already, but for you, it may not have been visible, but it will launch a pane. And then this pane allows us to change the properties of this visual element. Now, let me take this time to explain to you that everything in C# is a class. The very visual elements that you're dragging over from the toolbox, they're listed here. The button is a class, but when you drag it over, you've instantiated an object of this class. So in the context of the label is a C# class. You drag it over, you now have an object called label 1. And this object has properties that can be changed. And these properties are all encapsulated inside of the object and, by extension, the class type. All right. So I have this object here on my Winforms called label1, and it's of the type or the class type label. And then I'm going to change the properties so I can change the font. So I hope you pause the video and look through all the possible properties that could be changed. There are quite a few. I'm not going to go through every single one. I'm just going to focus on the one that is important, which is font. So I want to change the font. So I expand the font property. I see name. That would be the type of font. I can change that to maybe, well, you may have other fonts, or I have fonts that you don't have, but I'm going to make some changes. So you can style it how you see fit. I'm just changing it out. So I change the name, I change the size, and as you can see, the changes are being revealed real time. And then I'm going to change the text that's being displayed, because I want it not to say label one, but to say something like car rental system. All right. And then car rental system goes off, so I can just pull it back in. I want it to be center aligned, because you can see it's more, well, it fills out the label container. So I'm going to drag it to the center of the form itself. And there I have my label, car rental system. All right. So I took the label and I changed the properties that I wanted. And now I can see the manifestation of those changes. All right, so let's start dragging over some actual form elements. And if you have any experience building forms, in web applications, then it's the same concept. You have a form, you have controls that allow the user to enter information. And of course, based on the visual element you use, you are controlling the type of information that you're expecting from the user. And then ultimately we have a submit button. So for our car rental system, we'll be collecting the customer name, the date that the rental is being made, the date the car is supposed to be returned, and the type of car that is being rented, and then we'll have a submit button. Nice and simple, but we are using a few form elements, and along the way, we'll see exactly how each one works. So let's start with the customer name. So I'm going to drag over the text box for that. So I see a text box, and that I think is the most ideal control. And there's a little error again, but I think that the text box is the most ideal control to, collect the customer name, the name of the customer who is taking the car. All right. Now I just dragged over the text box. I have it on the form, but I don't know if I come back tomorrow, I may forget why I have the text box there. If somebody comes to use the application and they say a random text box, they don't know what information they're expecting from them. So it is prudent of us to make sure that we have a label above each control, right? So I have that label, and I'm going to change the properties. So this label is going to say customer name, right? And then it is letting you know that this is a visual cue as to what this text box is for, right? So for each control, we have a label that is going to kind of signal to the user, hey, this is the information I'm requiring from you for this control. All right. So we have customer name. And if you want to change the other properties, like maybe I want the font to be a bit bigger, so I want this to be 12. All right. And then you can see that 12 is kind of hedging over the text box. So of course I just reposition it so that everything looks good and uniform. All right. So we have customer name, and then we have date in, date out. So I chose date in and date out, or the dates the car is being rented and the date it is to be returned, because I want us to look at the date time picker. So I drag that over, and then I put it where I want it to go. And this one now will actually give us a calendar. So I'm just going to expand this so you can see the full date in there. And copy and paste is a beautiful thing. So I want two calendar controls, one for the date it's being rented and one for the date it's being returned. So I can just copy and paste. I just use Control-C, Control-V after selecting it, and there we go. So we have two. And then the label, I already have this label. It has the font size I want. So instead of dragging over a brand new label and going through the properties every time, I'm just going to copy this label twice. All right, so copy and paste and position. So that's that one, this one. And then I can just click the label and change the text. All right, so I'm just helping you along to be efficient in this because it can be time consuming when you're going to the toolbox and dragging over every time, changing the properties every time. So if you can just, get comfortable, realize copying and pasting is not such a bad thing, and you just know what to change, then eventually you become a master. All right, so we're changing this to date rented, and I'm changing this one to date returned. So the text says date returned. All right. The next thing that we're doing is a list of the type of cars and the one that is being rented. So for that, I'm going to use a combo box. So the drop-down list is probably what you would use in HTML, and that's fine. In Winforms, it's called a combo box. They don't call it a drop-down list, all right? But then you may see other lists because you have the list box. You also have the list view. So, well, the list box is probably the more parallel one to the combo box because this is a drop-down and this is just an area with a list in it. So I'm going to choose the combo box since that's what you're probably more familiar with both as a programmer or a web programmer and a day-to-day user of any application. So this one looks similar to a text box, except you see that little down arrow there, which suggests that it can be a drop-down list. So I'm just going to expand this, and I'm going to make sure that all my controls kind of have the same width, so everything looks, uniformed. All right, I'm going to copy one of my existing labels, move it down, and then change the text. So this one is type of car. All right. Now, I skipped this step earlier and I'll just show you now. So when you click on the text box, you're going to see this little black arrow appear at the top. So let's say this is a text box. It's single line, and you are probably wondering, okay, how do I make it longer or how do I make it taller? Because you notice you can only adjust the width only left to right. So if you click that little black arrow, you can make it multi-line, which then makes it, if you wanted to put in a paragraph or facilitate the entry of a paragraph amount of text, then you can do multi-line. So this would be perfect for like comments or something like that. But for customer name, I don't need at all, or I don't need a paragraph looking structure. I just need a text box from left to right. So in the same way, when we click the combo box, you see that little black arrow, and when we click it, it will allow us to say edit items. So I'm going to click edit items, and then I'm going to fill it with the types of cars that I expect to show up when we select the drop-down box. All right. So the types of cars could be Honda, Toyota, and a very popular car back home was Lada. And we also had the buggy. All right. So Honda, Toyota, Lada, and buggy. Those are the cars that we have in our rental system. And then to complete this exercise, we are going to have a submit button. So I go back to my toolbox, get my button, drag it over, weather my error, put it on the screen. I can make this button as big and bold as I want. I mean, I can resize it. I can go back to properties and change the font. So I'm going to change this font to look just like the font at the top. That's the Matura MT script capitals, and the size of the text is going to be something like 25. All right. And then I don't want it to say button 1. That's ugly. So I want it to say submit. So this is going to be the submit button. So let's just take a look at the form. We have the customer name, we have the date rented, the date returned, and the type of car. So let's just click start, which is going to save all the changes, compile everything, and then load up. All right, and here we are. So we have our car rental system, and I can test it out. All right, so I can enter the customer name. I can use my date picker and select the date. That looks really cool. So you see, I got a date picker with very little effort. If you do web programming, you know that that's not that easy. And the type of car, the drop down, and I can select. But then you notice that type of car, the combo box allows me to type. It's not an autocomplete. It's just the behavior of it. It allows me to actually type in a value that might not have been in the list, which is not necessarily ideal, because the point of a drop-down list is that you want to control the person's selection, not allow them to enter any and anything. And then we click the submit button, and we see that well, even though it looked good in the design, the rendering doesn't look that way, right? So I'm going to have to modify maybe the width so that the T doesn't get chopped off. So I can just close that, and then we go back, I adjust the submit, all right? And then what I'm going to do with type of car now, click the combo box, and then we go back to our properties. So if you lost the properties, you can always just right click the control, click properties. And then what we're going to do is change the behavior. So the drop down style has 3 modes. It has simple. And when I click simple, you notice that it no longer looks like a drop down. No, it looks just like a text box. That's not what we want. So I'm going to go back and change it to the other style as soon as I can find it. All right, and I'm not finding it because I don't have this. I have the form selected. So you have to make sure you're selecting the correct control when you're looking over by the properties. All right, so simple drop down and then drop down list now actually looks more like what I'm expecting. So it looks uneditable from the design. And I'm sure that when we run again, it will be just a drop-down list that doesn't allow me to type anything in there. All right, so let's just click start again and take a look. All right, so this looks a bit better now. So submit is showing properly, and type of car is giving me the list without allowing me to type anything in there. All right, so if I fill out this form, and I select my type of car, and then I click submit, my expectation is that something is going to happen. It's going to give me some feedback, letting me know that I submitted something. So that is where events programming comes in, all right? So we did discuss earlier that when we inadvertently double-clicked the label, and by extension might double click any other control, it will actually generate a method. And that's not the way I want you to do it. I want it to be far more deliberate when generating events, so that you don't run into problems later on. So I'm going to show you one error that you can prepare for when you have an event that you didn't necessarily plan for, and then you try to do a cleanup, and you're going to get this error. And then I'm going to cut the video here, and in the next video, we're going to start looking at how to deliberately create events that actually do stuff. So when you're in the code behind, I call it the code behind. So let's say we didn't have it up, and I wanted to get to the code file for the form1.cs. I can right click on the form, right click pretty much anywhere in the interface here in the design, and I will see the option that says view code. So if I right click here, I see view code. If I do it over there, or if I do it on the form, view code is going to appear. So when I click view code, it brings up that code file nonetheless. Now, you don't want to edit much in this file just yet. As it stands, the only thing that's really, really important, or rather everything here is important but this method stub, because once again, this is the method stub that was generated as a click event on the label 1. So that means when I click this method is going to fire. It's empty, so clicking it won't have any effect. But then obviously it doesn't make sense I have these empty methods. It makes the code messy and harder to maintain as you go along. And so I would clean it up. So I made the mistake, I'm going to clean it up. So I delete it. All right. Now here's the problem that you might run into when deleting that. And if you delete anything, make sure that's all you delete. Everything else here should stay the same way. The public partial class, form1, that's the name of the form and the code file, and it is inheriting from a base class called form. And then we have a constructor, and that is just running this initialize component. If you don't remove this, if you remove anything else, please don't remove these lines that are there already. All right, so I removed the click event, and then I click start, and then we're going to get an error. All right, so it's telling us there were build errors. Do you want to go to the last successful build? To me, that doesn't make sense to do because I want to see the error. I don't want to continue using the program in its previous state. So I'm going to click no. And then the error list is going to tell me that it does not contain a definition for something, something, something. So that's a mouthful. But when I double click it, it's going to bring me to the error line. And what it is saying to me, now this is the designer.cs file. So this error line is in a file that we did not write. We haven't been authoring any code. All we did was drag and drop, but the engine, the whole development studio, is generating this code for us. So each control that we've dragged over is represented here in code. All right. And then what it is saying is that we had created a click event and associated it with label 1. And so it's looking for that click event or that function. That's the function I just deleted. So we all should know by now that, or if you don't, that's fine. Whenever you have a function and you're calling that function, if the function does not exist, then you're going to get an error. So you have to define a function and then you can call said function. So we had the function definition. It was there, we deleted it, but we still have the function call in the auto-generated code. So what we can do then is just remove this line, because really we don't need to call the function because we just deleted it. And then by making that adjustment, I can click start again, and then I'm in business. So that's just another thing I wanted to help you through, because maybe you would have generated some click events or some events that you didn't necessarily want. You did by accident, and that's fine. That's understandable. But then you remove them and then you're running into errors and not sure how to go through the errors. That is how. So this is us designing Form 1. In the next video, we'll be looking at renaming our controls and the importance of doing so, and how we will actually collect the information that was input into the form.